You are listening to Bits of Signum, Creator Stories Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bits of Signum, Creator Stories. We're so excited today to have Joe Schaeppi. I'm Angela Dalton, I'll just say up front, the founder and CEO of Signum Growth, and also my partner, Eliza, who is also at Signum Growth as our head of IP development. She's also the CEO and founder of Visible Realms and has 12 billion TikTok views to her name. Sorry, I just love to throw that out, so I'm going to go ahead and add it. We do that's totally impromptu. Okay, so let's get to Joe. So Joe Schaeppi is the CEO and founder of Solsten. I got to meet Joe on stage actually in San Francisco at VentureBeat, and I was with John Linden, the CEO of Mythical, and it was one of those rare moments where I hadn't met you before we were on stage together, and I was distracted during your during your intro and at how cool what you do is and how different your background is. So I'm just going to let you go ahead and describe it. I do remember that you are a clinical psychotherapist, and you've been described as a visionary in human psychology. And I'll just throw out one other headline, which is that on the surface, you've got video games and cigarettes on your resume. But in the end, you're one of those rare people in our industry that I feel is constantly making the world a better place with the products that you're bringing to the world. So over to you, Joe.
Cool. Thanks for having me, Angela and Eliza. It's always great talking to both of you. So, and both the things you mentioned, part of my career path early on, I was asking myself the question of how do you fundamentally improve the human condition? Like, if I'm going to live a life, what's a life worth living? And we're kind of like, that ikigai, like where are my talents and where do those overline with like what's needed in the world? And I started by volunteering in a hospital in Minneapolis. So I volunteered in the ER, set up surgeries, cleaned up surgeries. It was literally a messy job, with the idea that, you want to help people become a doctor. So spent a lot of time in the ER and really realized that a good chunk of the people were there were there because of mental health reasons. In the US, the stats, something about like 50% of ER visits have a mental health cause or component to them, which is very high. And of those, about 7 out of 8 of them go undiagnosed or misdiagnosed. So you can start to run the numbers in terms of like repeat visits to the ER. And I would spend time. I'd listen to these people. I'd see them. I was like 18 years old and really realized that this thing called awareness, how aware are we of self and how aware are we of other? And that declines when we're not doing well, when we're out of a job, when we're frustrated, when we don't have good people around us to help us become aware. And the number one tool to increase human awareness is psychological assessment. It's being able to sit down, go to the doctor, or many people have taken something like the Myers-Briggs. They know their personality type. That's not really an accurate psychological assessment. So that's the first step. And so the next step for me was like, I'll go in and become a psychologist. And that's where I discovered human factors, which was this beautiful thing. And I'm like, hey, I can design environments that actually nurture people from a psychological perspective into better places. So how we architect space is very, very important. And a lot of that was not thought through in terms of how we architected America. There's a really cool book by an author named James Kunstler called The Geography of Nowhere on how America was architected mostly around cars, not around people. And there's implications for that. So we created a country around efficiency, and efficiency is boring. That's the problem with efficiency. If you think of like stories like The Lord of the Rings, a guy takes a ring and throws it into a volcano and saves the world. Very efficient version of The Lord of the Rings, very boring version of Lord of the Rings. So efficiency is, not the way to design things. It's a part of it. It can be a part of it depending on the system. And so went into human factors, studied anthropology, and my whole focus became, how do I architect and build experiences in a way that helps improve the human condition? Much like, I'm in Sweden right now. Kids who go to forest school here learn very differently than the kid that might grow up at an inner city school in Los Angeles. Like the conditions different. You could have the same teacher, the same teachings, but the conditions can really influence how that person achieves. So with that being said, yeah, started my career early on at PMI, as you mentioned, working on internal systems. One of the ones was how do you actually reduce the risk of cancer? So specifically, the MD PhD that I worked with there, literally said, I will save more lives, more years of human life than my two medical doctor parents who hate that I work at PMI.
And
And
PMI is Philip Morris, for those who don't know. Go
yes,
ahead.
yeah. So, very old company. They've been around since like the 1850s. And, they're I think from an interest perspective, they're not out to kill you. They're literally, how do I save? They don't want to kill their customers. No company wants to kill their customers. Tobacco is a dangerous product, full stop. But over time, how do you anthropologically? And I think questions like this are really challenging. You have places like France or Germany where a lot of people smoke, and people have been smoking for at least our species, since we were a species. And so you have people who are interested in saving life, solving hard problems. And, I started there and I was running a UX lab as a part of that with like 28 startups, and really realized that play was an integral part of behavior change and an integral part of how we think and experience reality. And I'd been doing an interview actually while I was as for one of the side companies as a part of this technology park in Switzerland. And a woman there, and it was just a user interview. She brought up something that kind of like hit home, which was, or not hit home, but it was like it hit me pretty hard. It was that her husband beats her, and it was a normal user interview. And one of the things I realized is when you do user interviews really well and you connect with somebody, they open up and they'll tell you stuff about their lives and what's going on. Because ultimately, that's why we use products and play games, is because they integrate into our life and who we are as a person. And I was like, holy crap, I have no idea how to answer this. Like, do I report it? I don't know what to say. Do I say something? And I was like 24. So I said, okay, I got to go back to school. And that's when I went, rather than the human factors route, I went back to clinical psychology and became a clinical mental health counselor and studied under a woman named Dr. Sugarman. And I said, who am I to say I'm going to design experiences that are healthier and better for people if I've never treated people myself? And I've never actually worked with people with addictions, with cognitive behavioral issues, with brain trauma. Who am I to say I can design for them? And that was at the same time I was a UX director at McCann. So I was building experiences for like big companies like Intel and Verizon, and just realized over and over again, hey, can I get the customer data, please? Yeah, they're X year old male or females, and here's their interests, like four of them, by the way. And we spent like $400,000 on this data also, from Nielsen or whoever. And I'm the person creating the experience, and I'm like, can't do anything with this. There's the famous like Ozzy Osbourne and King Charles, where it's like 77 years old, male from the UK, upper income tier. But like anybody who had to buy either of them a gift or create an experience would know that the Prince of Darkness, or the Ozzy Osbourne one, anyway. They, they very, very different reality or experience you'd probably want to create for those two people. And so I was doing a lot of clinical neuropsychological assessments at the time. And so this goes back to the very beginning of being in hospitals. They take about 7 hours. They're mostly cash pay because a lot of insurances don't cover them. In Europe, if you want to get one, you get put on a list in most countries, and they'll only give you the section that they think that they're going to diagnose for. So if they think you have ADHD, like you're going to wait 9 months, you're going to take that part of the assessment. And then if nothing shows up, well, oh, we should look at this now. Okay, back on the list. So it can literally be years before you get treatment if you're from Europe. And in the US, you're either not getting treatment or you're spending, 7,000 plus typically. And it's like 7 hours. And at the end of it, a lot of the assessment data, it's only like at best 85% accurate a lot of the time. So if someone said like, hey, we're going to do surgery and we're going to remove your leg, but there's a 15% chance we're wrong, that's a pretty big percent. You'd be like, I'm going to get a second opinion. But we prescribe drugs to people. We go through therapy. We do all these things from a mental health perspective based on diagnosis that is fundamentally flawed. So at the time, what I specialized in was adventure therapy, because play has always been a huge part of my life. Like I skied professionally kind of alongside a lot of what I was doing there. And I got to personally see the benefits of flow states and play. And so went to adventure-based psychotherapy. And that's kind of where the world of gaming came in. So said, okay, what if we can take play behavior? Because play, there's something called the grabs model that we use for diagnosis and adventure therapy. And it has a lot to do with observation. And the cool thing about play is there's this saying like, show me how you play and I'll tell you who you are. And I got to really see as a therapist how much play was so much more accurate of cutting to the core of a person than a lot of the assessment techniques that we use today in medical and in clinical settings. One of my favorite activities is you take a couple and you put them in a canoe and you tell one of the people, hey, go 45 degrees to the right, 45 degrees to the left, and end up at that spot right there. The other partner didn't hear it. And you say, okay, you're going to go 45 degrees to the left and then 45 degrees to the right, and you're going to end up at that spot. Now, you guys can have zero verbal communication, go into the canoe and get to where you're supposed to get to. And you give them a tippy canoe. It's not like a nice stable one. It's like a proper canoe. And typically, the worse the relationship is, the faster the canoe tips over. And then you get, they're wet. They forget you're there because they're in a play setting. We were supposed to go that way. We were supposed to go that way. They're like yelling at each other. And then I come in, they forgot I was even there. Hey, is there any time in your guys' relationship where you both wanted to do things differently, but you wanted to get to the same spot? And if you communicated, let me know where you guys were supposed to get to. And they go, there. They both point to the same spot. And then they look at me confused. Yeah, if you communicated, it was just a straight line. Oh my gosh, like multiple things happen. I got to observe how they fight. I got to observe how good their communication is based on the parameter of how fast does the canoe tip over or not, or how tippy is the canoe. I get to see all these things. And not only we get to resolve something, there's something like if you repeat an activity about 500 times, that's how much it takes for a new synapse to form. But when you're in a state of play, it only takes about 5 to 10 times. So play is so powerful for both understanding, exploring who we are, as well as changing our behavior in positive ways. So that's what kind of brought me into gaming, and Big Fish, validated some of these ideas of, hey, we can do this. And then 6 years ago, we started Solsten.
Mm-hmm. Wow, there's so much there. I wish we could do a whole podcast on behavior psychology, because that's a big mantra for us at Signum. Is we always say we're students of, first and foremost, of behavioral trends and behavioral shifts, and we're very much into UGC right now because of the behavioral shift that I've seen from. I have kids, and we both have kids, older and then younger, and the younger Gen Alphas are, their behavior is just totally different, which is Roblox. But anyway, behavior is super important. And I also would love to talk to you separately with my husband and I, so that we could maybe do the tippy canoe.
It's pretty fun. It works. Yep.
But before we do that offline, can you just talk to us about what the software does? I mean, clearly it's much richer and deeper than even we understand, and but it would be great to hear from you why you have so many. I mean, the users you have listed, just on your webpage, are Voodoo, Tilting Point, Supercell. As I mentioned, John Linden at Mythical, he's a huge advocate. Their user, So there. Then I know there are others that you can't mention. But what does the software do, and why are these people using it?
Yeah, and I mean, everyone from like EA and Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes to Call of Duty like uses Solsten. So when we first started, one of the things that we had to overcome that I didn't think we would have to. This was my naivety as a founder, which I think that's every founder's secret weapon, is how naive we are about certain things. My naivety, and I remember Brad Feld, who wrote, I think, his Venture Deals, but kind of famous investor. But Brad said, Joe, I can't invest in Solsten because I love what the idea is. I think you guys are going to have way too much education. I'm like, we'll be fine. Well, I love teaching. So and I'll get into the software, but I think to describe the software, where we have to really start is with behavior versus psychology. And we've been working with behavior data forever, like what people did. And behavior is really interesting in the fact that it tells you what happened, but it doesn't tell you what will happen. Psychology tells you what will happen. So if I knew the psychological profiles of both of the couples going into the canoe experience, I could already tell you how it's going to go. So it's kind of like both play into each other. The experience itself, when it's in a play setting, helps inform the psychology, so the behavior in that setting. But most behavior is noise. Like when I come back to Sweden, like I'll eat reindeer tonight, for example. That's a very different behavior than in when I'm in, let's say, California. I'm not going to be eating reindeer. So your age changes, your location changes. One of the stable things about us that we all have is our psychological landscape, our personality. So what Solsten does from a software perspective, we have two major products. The way to think of Solsten is we help customers understand any audience. So whether that's their own audience or any audience that they would like to understand that's not theirs or that they're building for or creating towards. So we help them understand any audience and then resonate with that audience. So whatever they're building, whether that's marketing assets, marketing creative, features, elements, events, all those things that they're building, we're able to actually know who are the people within their audience or even another person's audience that those things are going to resonate with and how they're going to perform. So maybe an example is like Mythical Games. They have NFL Rivals, amazing, like very cool game. I think it's been ranked in the top 10 for sports for quite a while now in terms of the App Store. We had one trait, and I'm not allowed to say it per Mythical. They don't want me to tell this, but they had one trait that really stuck out from their audience. And when I say trait, what I mean is it's a part of our personality. It's a part of our cultural attributes, the things that make us who we are. These are what traits are. They're enduring parts of ourselves. They had one trait that really stood out with their high LTV players. They changed the ad to really include this trait in terms of the wording and what was there. And the ad gets 50% more installs than any of the other creatives, their best performing creative that actually they had before that. So that's like a quick example of how it can be used, but it's used for feature development. There's games like PAX Day, the mainframe. When they started making that MMO, every step of their player tests, they would use Solsten because you could actually see which psychological personas the players fit into during the playtesting. So they would actually know, oh, the ones that are all complaining about this, it's only a market size of like 5 million people, and it's not really the core user. So they actually could design to their core audience. And when they created like their marketing, for example, we knew some very specific things about that space. So their videos are all built around the personality of their core audience. And so when we did the alpha, there was like I think 300,000 people that signed up. That's in their email list. We can verify on our backend that 90% of those are actually their core persona. It's so they're literally building towards their optimal audience. So Solsten as a software, our Navigator product is basically the largest psychological database in the world. You can query it however you'd want to. If you want to look at people that like Nike, you can do that. You can see here's the Nike audience. We were showing Disney Plus, some of their folks the other day. Like we know more about Disney Plus people than Disney does. So you can say, hey, like you want to see Disney. Oh, and their favorite platform is not Disney Plus. It is Netflix still. So, it's like teaser. But so we can, no matter what audience you want to look at, you can come to Solsten and slice it and dice it. If you're like, hey, what's Gen Z like versus, Gen, I don't know, millennials? And how do they use like Peloton's a customer, for example? Like how do they use Peloton differently? And we can look at that data. So that's Navigator. And maybe something interesting here, we're calling it the state of the player report. It's based on 500,000 people from last year to 2020 or to 2022 to 2023. And we're literally showing the different generations, what's different psychologically from 2022 to 2023. That's going to drop, I think, next week or the week after. But it's basically like if you were aliens and came to Earth and we're like, hey, what are these 3 billion people in the world that play games? Tell me about them. Here you go. Here's your report. It's literally representative of like 1/3 almost of all of humanity, which is crazy. So, I think that's pretty powerful. And then So navigators really understand any audience, and then anything you'd want to test or see what resonates with them, you can do that. And then traits is it's really, really, it's my dream from when I was at McCann and dealing with my Ozzy Osbourne and King Charles problem of, yeah, we just spent $500,000 on these user personas that you can't design to or create to in any meaningful way, just demographics and behavior information. Well, now you can be a company like Peloton, and not only do you have to not have persona projects all the time that are based on random surveys, you could actually have a living, breathing pulse of who your customers are and the different psychological groups that are there, and you can start to delight them rather than guess at what that means. And so our whole goal is human resonance. And I think the reality is most designers, most creators don't want to build a system of efficiency like the highway systems of they want to build like what's that small little cool town in Italy that I just feel amazing when I'm there because it was built around human beings. That's what most creators want to do. They're the brilliant people. They're the ones who with the imaginations. We're just here to say, hey, here's who it's for. And that's a lot of times the missing piece. So we get to work with like all these brilliant, game designers and marketers and creators, and kind of for them, what they'll usually say is like, it felt like I was given a whole box of Crayola crayons, and now I know what color palette is actually going to really be amazing for them. And I can paint whatever I want now. Or, I had a handgun, now I have a machine gun. You can guess what game makers say, use that reference. But it's effectively, we're a force multiplier for anything you're creating. And our whole goal is not just that, hey, when this feature goes to market or when this product goes to market, we don't want it to just work. Part of your job as a business developer, as a creator, is to understand where the market is going and create the thing that has the optimal level of potential. And one of the things we see game developers really fail at, especially this last 2 years, is they'll build a game that they think is really good based on past competitive data. So they'll use like data.ai or other tools to see these games were performing well. We're going to build something like that. And that's already what people had, so it's, and part of the problem is now with games, you're not just competing against what everyone else is making, you're competing against the ceiling that already exists. So there's switching costs. Like if I want to leave Roblox, I have to leave with my friends. I already made a bunch of stuff in there. So the gaming industry is maturing, and you have to be 10x better than Roblox if you want to get those people to move over from Roblox to your platform. And so what we really focus on is psychology, which is, hey, here's where people are going. And where we see game developers fail is they'll focus on what was, it's like that already exists. And then while they're building, they're not validating it against the highest potential market. So let's say they do play testing, for example. Like we had one really large company, not going to name the name, where everybody in their play tests were not representative of one persona in their market audience. And so all the playtest data that, because these are big game companies have professional playtesters, they get gift cards, they come in, they play the game. So what was happening is they were developing the game to an audience that didn't even represent their actual market. And then by the time the game gets live, there'll
Wait,
be
I'm sorry to interrupt. You mean the playtesters were not even remotely related to who they were selling to? Is that what you're saying?
for who the game was for. Yeah. Because what we'll do with Navigator, like you'll like PAX Day, for example, we're making a game for MMO people, medieval MMO people. That's our market. Cool. And then we can go in Navigator and we can launch that dashboard based off of all the people that we know play medieval MMO games. And we can go in, and what we can see is here's the different psychological groups. There might be 2, there might be 10. We don't know. It forms them kind of like Harry Potter's sorting hat. It organically finds these are ones with similar traits, and it creates those groups. And then it knows about how many of them there are in the world, how much money they spend on average. And so sometimes what will happen is we'll see like really smart teams build a game, and we'll do the testing while they're building it and say, hey, not only like all your features are like crushing it for like this 5th persona here, but there's only about 1 million people in the world like them. And we had, again, I'm not going to name names. It's a person who's built a multi-billion-dollar company. He's incredible at what he does. He's like, I read through that persona and it's me. He's like, because I was like, I'm the player. I play these types of games. And he's like, yes, I am the player. And I'm like, but of course how many people build a $1 billion company? Like not very many. So you're not representative of the big part of the market. So you're building a game for yourself and your friends that are representative of that smaller persona. So while you're testing, what we're doing is we're fixing the local maximum problem of while you're testing your game. The problem with testing and A/B testing is you're often going to just hit local maximums. Like, hey, we have two really good ideas. What? It's a red stick and a blue stick. Cool. Everybody likes the blue stick. Great. Now we're going to do different shades of blue sticks. And then you end up with a specific shade of blue stick, and you think that you're making the right experience. But they really just wanted chocolate. Did you test chocolate? No, we didn't even think about that. Like, so with Solsten, what you're going to be able to do is make sure that when the game gets to launch, it's been built to your highest potential market. And this is where a ton of game companies fail because they built this really cool experience that if you ask them, can you tell me what the market potential of your game is before you've launched it? They're like, you can't do that. Yes, you can. So you got to work with Solsten. But so we're able to do that. And then once the game gets live, this is big mistake number 2 is they don't align the marketing team with the product team because the first time user experience and the creative, especially in a privacy forward world, like Google's getting rid of cookies at the end of this year. It's not stopping. It's going to be less and less visibility. So you got to make sure your creative is dialed in, not to like the third tier group of your market, but like the top group. Because then what happens is as those people come into your game, the game team is now taking that play data and they're going to be optimizing the game based on that play data. So we screwed this up at Big Fish. We published a game called Dungeon Boss, and that game was like top 50 grossing games in the App Store for a while. Like I think 38 got up there. Then we got this big organic install push from being featured by Apple. And a flood of users came in. The data was pretty noisy. And the team had this idea that they just wanted to build more competitive features because it's for 35-year-old males who like to battle bosses. That's what Dungeon Boss was for. And they were really stuck on that idea. Well, that group that came in and caused a lot of noise in the data, so to speak, actually were monetizing much better than that other group. And demographically, they actually were women in their 40s that wanted to collect all the cute little characters. And they didn't want to do PvP towers. And, so to me, honestly, it's a bit criminal. Like it's gaming is the only industry, and I don't, criminal is not the right word, but I think gaming teams are so talented and so creative that it's really hard for me to see when games fail because they're unwilling to look at who actually showed up. And I forget what artist, it might have been like, I'm going to misquote this. I think it was maybe Prince, but they said one of the beautiful things about the creative process and music is you make something and the song means something to you. But then the moment you release that song, it's not your song anymore. It's the world's song. And you get to learn about what it means to the world and what it means to the people that actually are listening to it. And it might be very different than why you wrote it and what it meant to you. And the gaming industry, for some reason, hangs on to this idea a lot of the time that it's still for them. Like it's still for who we created it for or who we thought we were creating it for. And because gaming it's still an interactive art. And so when it gets live, what we like to do is say, hey, here's who's in the game. Your creative is literally bringing in the third highest grossing persona in the MMO space. This is how we design creative for the top grossing persona. And then now when the data starts to come in, they know that the data is actually indicative of not a local maximum, but the highest potential. So that's how we really help game companies and non-game companies really help build their experiences around human resonance with the highest potential for their specific business.
Okay, everything that you said is so amazing, and to be honest, I'm such a Solsten fangirl. I can't, I'm always going to be that way. But because as a creative, I will say that I have made tons of mistakes, and it comes from the fact that I'm a keen listener, and I'm also keenly empathically aware, and I want to connect with my audience. But as soon as you put it out there, you got noise. You have noise coming from comments, noise coming from data,
Yes.
and you're so easily misled And it's so frustrating when that happens, because then you're starting to doubt whether it's your intuition or your creative. And for me, I can love and, find interest in almost anything, but I want to connect. And so what gets me most frustrated is when I don't. So this to me is what's so exciting about the tools that you have here, in the differentiation of, like, I mean, App Annie and all of the data stuff I've already enjoyed seeing that. But as you said, it's kind of just like, it's what was, and it's very faceless. It's like a blip here and a blip there. You can make as many mistakes as you can make correct assumptions from what comes from that. Now, I want to ask you, in all of this interesting data, traits and stuff, has there been something in an audience that has surprised you and your client?
Every time. I think so I like yeah, I can think of a couple off the top of my head. And I have one fun one. And I think what happens when clients see their audience, like especially for the first time, and I it's a weird thing to say because it's like you've ridden the bus with these people every day because you're building for them. And you made an important point, Eliza. It's really hard to kind of sift through the noise because they'll often say, "Oh, we know all the loudest people on the bus," and so the people complaining, and that's often not indicative of the core bus users, the people that actually are there, that love the experience, that are there for it. And so what often happens is they'll see their audience, they'll be like, "Yep," like that. There's certain things that are reaffirming, like we call it face validity, where like, oh, that makes complete sense why this part of our product works, because they'll see the certain value or the personality style of their core audience. So what it does is it brings them the why on those sort of things. I think one of the fun ones, which was with Eve Online, actually, like probably one of the highest scoring audiences we've ever seen on altruism. And whenever you tell people that, they're like, "What, Eve? Like, it's super competitive. It's, you lose stuff. It's this MMO." And I think when you sort of see things like that, it's very cool to see. And a lot of games stop people. Where the conversation went was people talking about how a lot of games actually stop people from helping people. Where because there's opportunity for significant loss in a game like Eve, help is actually real and needed. So it's like, oh, so altruistic people actually tend to be a little bit more resilient, because if you're truly going to go in, try to help another person, you have to be ready for the help not to work. So a lot of people that they say they want to help, they tend to not actually score high on altruism. They tend to score high on like empathy, because we'll have audiences that are really high on empathy and low on altruism. And then we'll have customers go like, wait, what does this mean? This doesn't make sense. And well, yeah, they're really good at empathizing, but that doesn't mean they want to help. And then someone said to me, he's like, "Oh, that's like, I saw this thing on Californians and New Yorkers. Like New Yorkers, if your car's broke down on the side of the road, they'll like yell at you, but they'll like fix your car while they're yelling at you and help you change the tire. But a Californian will go, 'Oh, wow, that's such a bad day. Man, that really sucks.' But they're not going to actually help you. They're going to just keep driving." And I was like, yeah, that's basically a description of the two. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the platform is the discussions humanize the audience. So it's no longer like, oh, our players are, cursing about XYZ, or it humanizes them. And what you realize is like, there's this really important concept in psychology that a lot of people don't really get exposure to, especially in 2024. And the word that colloquially we use is this thing called toxicity. But in psychology, there's no such thing as toxicity. You can think of person A who's hyper vigilant. They need to know where everything is all the time. They're super time oriented, high on orderliness. And to a person who's very high on openness, isn't consistent on time, you put those two people in the same environment, they're going to go, "God, they're toxic." The toxicity comes from the chemical reaction. That's how it happens as an off gas. Same with games. Like we look at language in games. You can look at two players. One player says, F you name. Another player says F you name. And both of them said the exact same thing. But two of them, the engagement went up. Oh, they're friends. They're just messing with each other. The other one churned and left and said that the other player is toxic. And so, and usually what we mean in games when we talk about toxicity, we mean verbal abuse. And so in clinical psychology, though, you have a couple that comes in or a patient, and you're working through their issues. And it's, hey, that same hyper vigilant person working at a laid back coffee lounge or bar that's very calm, like of course you're gonna it's toxic for you, quote unquote, and toxic for them. Let's put you in a bustling bar in New York City that's fast paced, and all of a sudden this is the best employee we've ever had, and this person's like on it and so diligent and just a breath of fresh air, and oh my gosh. And so what you see when you work with people is you want to humanize them. So it's the same thing goes like for remediation with players. Like if a player gets reported or something, like what we see is like over 95% of players, when they're just communicated in a way that makes sense to them, they don't do it again. They're like, oh yeah, I didn't realize that. Like we had with EVE Online, to use them as an example again. They took our data, they piped it into their customer service report, basically when a ticket came in, and it just showed the communication style of the person. So like, this is a thinker, this is a feeler, and our data shows like, do this, don't do this. This is what they're like when they're low functioning. This is what they're like when they're high functioning. Their head of research came back to us. He's like, our NPS scores just went up by 30 points for customer success, for doing our customer support. And players thought that according to him, players thought they had actually had gotten rid of and hired new customer support people. And that wasn't what was happening at all. They were just being spoken to in their communication style. And so with that being said, I think that's to come full circle, that's the surprising part, is it allows people to see their players as human beings. And that's where when, people go, oh, like these people are really toxic. It's like, okay, let's figure out who they are. And maybe they're better for another one of your properties. Like, and in that game, they're not toxic at all of a sudden. They're just a normal player. And so understanding like your people as human beings, which we all are, we're all human beings. None of us are angels and none of us are devils. We're all kind of there's some on the spectrum, but it's very, very rare. Most of us are somewhere in the middle somewhere. And that's the same with players, and being able to allow creators to cut through the noise and see their players as people. You can, control your reality a lot more then, whether it's the experiences, whether it's how toxic the environment, quote unquote, is. You could change that. It's a lot you can do when you understand who you're doing it for.
Absolutely. I mean, that's just what I think Solsten does, is shed some light on a very murky space where we're all just a little bit faceless. And I think that that's what you do so well with your personas.
It's pretty exciting to hear you talk about the way you do this, and the way you can get so precise into these different kind of personas. What are the, I would imagine that, I mean, I look at your list of customers, and it's pretty vast. Can you just talk about the challenge in getting there? Because I can't even imagine these guys opening up the kimono to a startup, knowing them for 20 years in the industry, and they're not the kind of guys to do that. So can you talk about that?
Yeah. I did a podcast like really early on with Mark Randolph. He's the co-founder of Netflix. He was like the first CEO there. And he has this book called That Will Never Work. And we were talking about that. It's, I think, back to the naivety of founders. Because I think, to answer the question correctly, it's like what the problem that we're solving at Solsten, I think it's a fundamental human problem. Like, who am I? It's a question that none of us can perfectly answer. And we're helping to solve that problem. And when I went into starting to build this, like, first I needed for myself some proof to know it could work. And that's where I spent time at Big Fish Games. So I do think it helped that I was the head of UX at Big Fish Games, and I was a clinical mental health counselor that did neuropsych assessment, and that also can cause problems too, in terms of like people having some cognitive dissonance with you sometimes too, when they're maybe more junior in their career and they might feel a little more insecure, because we had a person at pretty big company basically scream at another person at Solsten and say, this is all bullshit. And they called Solsten later and said, I'm really sorry I did that. It just put me on the spot. And everything the team is asking for is everything I don't know how to do and can't do, but you guys can. And I was afraid about my job. Wow, thanks for letting us know. Let's work together. Let's help elevate you. Let's help make your job more solid. Okay, that sounds great. But I was told by a couple people, VPs of consumer insights, VPs of product, CMOs, CSOs, that will never work, Joe. PlayFab, I talked to the founder there. He was like, wait, how are you getting data from the game companies? How do you? I think there's a lot of things that went into the setup strategically. So one, on the back end, my co-founder Bastian and actually our chief of staff Seb, there's a company that came out of Bastian's company builder called Status. They were a data synthesization company, like way before GDPR stuff. So from a day one, we took this stance of extreme privacy. Like, we're way more buckled up than GDPR would be, for example. So we never wanted psychological data to be tied to real identity. That was like a ethical stance that we took prior to GDPR. That actually, what I figured out, works as an insurance policy for a lot of game companies. Because if you do that, now Solsten collects sensitive data, your personal identifiable data they own. If you use Solsten, you have sensitive data and you have personal data. From an insurance policy perspective, those two are always separate. They're living in different environments. So the legal people like that. The lawyers see those sort of on the contract. This actually mitigates risk for us. It doesn't increase risk. So I think first is to understand finance and lawyers and what makes them happy. And we took that approach. I happen to have a lot of wonderful finance and lawyer and doctor people in my life. So that was something we wanted to understand from a contract perspective. So that was a start to it. The other aspect is, I think when you have something that, like Ken, the chief strategy officer at Activision, when I spoke with him, he's like, we do everything that you guys do. And then when he saw it, he's like, and we don't do everything that you guys do, and we couldn't do everything that you guys do. And I think when we do these things called customer result strategies. So when we come in, and this is actually a little bit of a challenge because a lot of game companies don't know sometimes, we say, what's the number one thing that you need right now? Like with Supercell was pretty easy for Heyday. They're like, we need to increase day 7 engagement. That's what we need to do. Cool. So that really helps us, because what we do is we build this customer results strategy around that specific need. And then we're able to look at the audience. We're able to see what we can do. And we go, okay, let's try this. And their day 7 engagement for Heyday went up by 22%. And we heard from the game lead, he's like, you guys helped bring Heyday up to some of the same level again of the rest of our portfolio. So, when we have those two steps, it's kind of like, I think, show don't tell, getting the chance to see it. The one aspect we had a really hard time around early on was we didn't have any money. So we never had a test case. Some of our first customers they're all paying customers. So like one of the first 5 was Hasbro, a game called Dragonvale. And that was, paying customer, but we had to initially convince. And I think one of the things there in psychology, if you give away therapy for free, you decrease the likelihood that the person will get better. And it tends to take longer to get better. People tend to value what they pay for. So basically coming in from a Solsten perspective and saying, here's how much you spend on these type of things today. And here's how much this costs. Here's how it's different and better. That really changes the conversation. And I think having walked the walk, like I can go to a company and say, hey, when I was at McCann and I built personas for Intel, here's how much it costs. And here's what they got. So it helps when you've been there. But I think the data integration part with Solsten, that part is what we do is so different than like when you see it, It's yeah.
Are you ever confused? Do they ever confuse you? Is part of the early conversation that they confuse you with something like App Annie?
Oh yeah. So I think it depends on the client, but yes. So with like data.ai or App Annie, like we actually play well with that information. I think it can be a good way to form theories, but if you test every decision you've made off of data.ai and how many of them have been successful, you're looking at noisy data because it's that's not what it's for. It's for understanding a market. It's for looking at a competitive landscape, which is valuable in and of itself. It's not, you don't, that's not how you design new things. Like everybody knows that's not how that works. But what people do is they're looking for a solution. So, like, I want to improve retention. I want my game to be successful. I want to improve creative, like I want my ROAS to go up, my CPIs to go down. And so they find, data.ai or, Game Refinery or maybe some other company, and it's the same solution, technically speaking. And so Solsten's a different way of looking at that solution. And it's a way often that people feel uncomfortable with to start because psychology sometimes makes people feel vulnerable. It makes people really excited or feel vulnerable. It's kind of like the same folks that, like, I had this whole family that I saw for therapy. And I'm like, yeah, yeah. And by the time I saw all the kids and the wife, I'm like, okay, this is pretty simple. You all are here because of the husband that doesn't want to get seen. Like, it's so I need to talk to him. You know, he was so insecure about seeing me. He didn't want to confront me. He didn't look me in the eye. Dr. Sugarman, who is my supervisor, who is brilliant and from the outside, like a blonde kind of, 50 something year old woman, very professional. And we convinced him to see Dr. Sugarman because he thought that was going to be the easy way. That was, whoa, like that's brutal. He walked out crying. He walked out of that session crying and going, holy, he had so much shame and realizations of how much pain he was causing that he wasn't aware of. But the awareness was the first step to the healing part. And so I think we have to kind of, like, people are very hot or cold on Solsten. And the people that are cold often have never used us or engaged with us. If you ask them, like, so when did you use it and apply it? They might say, like, if they've seen it, like, oh, I saw it at a past company. Did you use it? Did you apply it? No. So the people that are hot on it are the people that, like, either love psychology and understand the value of it, or they've used it. Like if you look at Zach Pond from MobilityWare, like he used this for everything from like launching their Monopoly game to some of the new stuff they're doing. And he's just like, this feels like cheating because we knock it out of the park every time we apply it. But he's like, it just makes sense though. It makes sense that, so I think like anything new, people have initial resistance. And I think that's one of the hardest things we have is building a category is hard. It's hard enough. Building a category that touches on some of our biggest insecurities as a person, which is the who am I question. Like, I had one person, a PhD in like information sciences. I got on a call and he started yelling that like what we do is bullshit. And the VP of marketing at this company was also on the call. And he started yelling that and he started ducking out of the call. And I was like, what is going on? And we slowed it down. I said, hey, like, tell me what you think. And he goes, well, your questions, they're all really biased. And I said, I said, well, we build psychological assessment questions. So sometimes the question's not even measuring what you think it is, or we'll put in like random items to detect like if somebody's falsely answering a questionnaire. So like we might ask you like, I'm happy all the time every day, because nobody's happy all the time every day. So if you answer that question 7 like out of 7 enough times, we know that's probably not a valid completion. So there's a very rational reason for him seeing like weird questions, because it's not a survey, it's a psychological assessment, very different. We're detecting bias. And I just asked him, I was like, and here's the mistake I made. I said, how do you check for construct validity and reliability in the questionnaires that you guys make? I was genuinely curious. This was earlier on in Solsten, and I figured, oh, he's got a PhD. He's a researcher at this big game company. And then I realized I asked him a question that he didn't understand, which the reliability of a assessment question is, if I ask you that question today and in a week from now, am I going to get the same response? So if it's 100% reliable, I'm going to get the same number from the, that person or the vast majority of people. Or if it's the validity, it means, is it measuring what it intends to measure? And so a lot of researchers don't do this kind of work. So we don't use that angle in sales anymore. We would have changed the call. But yes, there's definitely resistance. But now when you have like more, well, Call of Duty uses it, or EA uses it with Galaxy of Heroes, or so that helps a
Yeah,
lot.
you're sitting in a pretty sweet position these days, I would say. And
If anybody should be in the business of change, if anybody should be creating a category based on behavior change, when you have to change the behavior of your customers, I think I think it's you guys. Can I ask one rapid fire question to both of you? I didn't prep Eliza on this because I just thought of it, because we're talking about behavior change and this is so much fun, and you both have connections to Sweden. We're running out of time, but this is, I think, going to be fun. Tell us your connection to Sweden, and then tell us, because you referenced it, Joe, why are they so much happier there? Eliza, you go first.
Well, actually, you mean we have a connection to Finland, because Finland is the happiest place in the world.
Wait, but I thought it was Sweden, because you live in Sweden and
I
you're a
live in
Swedish Finn. But no,
Yes,
it's
I'm a
not?
Swedish speaking. Yeah, but Finland is the happiest place in the planet, and you have some connection to Finland too, right, Joe?
I'm half Finnish.
Oh,
So that's why we have all these
live in
Finnish.
Sweden?
My partner's Swedish.
Okay.
We live in Sweden, and we started the company in Stockholm.
Well, I just want to hear because it took me a while to untangle the Swedish Finnish connection with Eliza too. So I just want to hear. Just give us we have to wrap up because we're running out of time. But I want to hear the short story here between Finland and Sweden and why you have Finnish investors.
Yes, Eliza, we could you want to go for Finland, because I could speak to that.
Yeah, let's do it that way. Yeah.
Okay.
Go for Finland. Do you think a Swedish person would say that Sweden's the happiest place? Sorry, that's where I'll get off track here.
Everybody had when Finns hear that Finland is the happiest place, and Eliza can elaborate. It's a bit of an inside joke.
Yes, it's entirely we always were just yeah, sure. Maybe we're happy because we don't talk to each other is our initial reaction, because we keep a meter distance and do everything to avoid conversations and human contact. I think we're also pretty lonely later on in life, and there's a huge aspect of a downside there. But quality of life, a lot of green, fresh nature is one of the things. So it's the fact that we have pretty good health care. We're mostly financially fairly stable. There's not a lot of poverty that is very hard for people to handle. And then a lot of nature which we can enjoy. So there it's clean, unpolluted nature, which means that you can always go for a walk in a forest, and it's accessible to almost anyone. And I think those are kind of the reasons why we're considered the happiest. I wouldn't call it happy. Content is maybe the word.
I think it was my grandpa that came to America when he was younger. So he only spoke Finnish. He didn't speak English at all. He had to learn in school. But he's in Minnesota. So a lot of I think half the teachers spoke Finnish or Swedish. So he was fine. So he could get by. And part of the reason why they left is they were tired of Finnish people. And what he meant by that, though, is there's a solemnness to Finland, especially as you get older. And Sweden has a lot of that issue too. People are very lonely in older years. It's very rare that you'll see your neighbors at your apartment. They'll even listen. There's commercials about this up here. They'll wait and listen for when you're gone, and then okay, now we'll go. I've never seen some of our neighbors.
You guys, I'm sorry, but this has only made it more complicated, because I thought that you were going to say people are happy because, and instead it's we're talking about loneliness. We have to do a podcast on Swedish Finns who live in Sweden, and why they're happy, why they're not happy. This is a big topic that we haven't even thought about untangling. This is a detangling situation.
Let me Occam's razor this though. So I, like Eliza said, it's contentment. It's not happiness. And I think when you
Okay.
talk to Finns, they're like, let me see the data. Like, cause it's a lot of it's quality of life stuff that they're
Okay.
actually looking at. But
Mhm.
contentment, like if I actually come from my perspective as a trait psychologist and I'm thinking of it that way, Finnish people are some of the most resilient people in the world.
Hmm.
And if you look at it, like people that are like, I want to be happy, and the next thing they say is, I want psychological safety. As a therapist, I'm like, this isn't going to go well. If you think about like terms like psychological safety, where do kids go to when they need to feel safe? They go to the strongest person, mentally or physically. They want to be protected. So when you're in an environment where there's a lot of resilient people, and you'll hear this from Finns. Like I was at Dice with Mika from one of the companies we work with, and he's like, Joe, give me the Finnish answer of how you're doing, not the American answer. Thank you. And it's
We know
we're
Mika. We love
you're
Mika.
you're in Finland now. We can directly speak with each other, and there's a set level of resilience that's required for direct
Mm,
communication.
that makes sense. That makes
And so
sense.
when you're in an environment where if I say, and a lot of Sweden's a little bit softer, but a lot of the Nordics in the general, if somebody says something, we assume the best. Like we assume that, like, not that they're out to get us, like a lot of people do in other Western countries. And
Interesting.
so when you have that resilience and you can bounce back from negative experiences, like as a American Finnish person, I still hear one day the Russians are going to come. When you grow up as a kid and you hear stuff like that, there's a level of like between that and being in the cold, and you get resilient. It causes a certain sense of like the world isn't a completely safe place, and you have to go into the sauna, and then you have to go into the lake, and then you have to go outside and chop the wood for the fire, and it's minus 30 degrees, and like you build up resilience. And so the path to happiness, and I can say this from like seeing patients, or the path to at least contentment for sure, is through resilience. It's not through trying to be more comfortable. The more comfort we seek, comfort is if you comfort over time equals death. And because you can literally look at health statistics that the people that do less, that watch more TV, that sit on their bum, that the more comfort we seek, the sooner we die. So I'm skiing Vasaloppet on Sunday, which is going to be very uncomfortable. It's 90-kilometer ski race, and now we're confusing. We're switching back to Sweden, but it's kind of like there's a joke in Sweden that's like, if you're Swedish, you're either you've thought about doing Vasaloppet, you're training for Vasaloppet, or like you're doing the Vasaloppet. But it's kind of like this rite of passage. Like how many people from how many cultures do you think are going to wake up and ski 90 kilometers? And the Finnish version, which is not as famous, is like 100 kilometers. So it has to be that much
Of course,
harder,
we have
that
to
much
be
more
like make
painful.
it that much worse for everybody. Like just yeah, get it. It's the sisu part because it's not real
Exactly.
Finnish if it hasn't got that. But
Yes, you need the sisu.
thank you, Joe. I think you just gave me like a huge eye opener on something actually in my parenting that I have to think about because I'm a bit of a comfort seeker
Yeah.
but I'm also incredibly resilient, and I've forgotten why that resilience and how that resilience was created, and that maybe I need create a little bit more of resilience in my kids sometimes
I
than
love it. I mean, this
comfort.
is whenever I talk to you, Joe, I always feel like I get lessons for parenting. I mean, it's funny that you said that, Eliza, because we both have, kids and at various ages, and it's amazing. But thank you so much, Joe, for coming. We really loved having you. We want to have a follow up, and
Yes, we need to
yeah,
do this
this has been
again.
amazing. Yes,
we
thank
could
you
talk
so much.
just about the Nordics and the differences between and Minnesota, and what
Yes.
happens when Finns, Norwegians, and Swedes all come together. I said that to Mika, and he goes,
Ooh,
that
yes.
sounds like hell. And I said, no, it's actually quite nice.
Love it. I love it. I love
Yeah.
Love it. Let's do
Okay,
it.
well, thank you all for
Cool.
listening. And thank you, Joe. We'll see you next time. Thank you, Eliza.
Yep.
Goodbye,
All right.
Thank you so
everyone.
Thank you
much.
very much.
Bye.